Well, thank you all for joining us for tonight's webinar, Grief and the Holidays, Tips and Strategies on How to Cope. I'm Greg Berry, Assistant Director in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Just a quick note, since we're virtual, don't be surprised if something may seem out of place or a technical issue pops up. If you experience video or audio problems, click the reconnect button at the top of your screen. This will get you back into the webinar right away. The holidays are usually a happy and joyous time, but after losing a loved one, navigating your way through this time can be difficult with your feelings seemingly out of control at times. Tonight, we will explore ways you can cope after losing someone you were close to. At this time, I would like to introduce tonight's guest. Robert Smith serves as the Executive Director for the Amelia Center here in Birmingham. The Amelia Center provides grieving children, parents, and families a caring and compassionate environment that fosters hope and healing. Robert is a two-time alumnus of UAB. In 1995, he earned his bachelor's degree in psychology from the College of Arts and Sciences, and he received his Master of Art in Community Agency Counseling from the School of Education in 2000. Now, if you have any questions throughout tonight's presentation, please submit them in the chat. We'll have time for a Q&A before we leave you tonight. So at this time, I'm going to welcome Robert Smith and turn things over to him. Thank you so much for being here, Robert.
I'm glad to be here. And it's funny you mentioned technical issues right from the very start, since the first thing that we discovered was that my microphone on my computer wasn't working. So I'm doing this from my phone, and I just do not have the vision to pull this off on the phone. So if I stare at the screen, just know that it's because I can't see anything. So it's all good. My name is Robert Smith. I'm the Executive Director at the Amelia Center. I've been with the Amelia Center now for just over 21 years. Actually, in January, it'll be 22 years. As Greg mentioned, I did my work college-wise at UAB. Big fan of the school and what it has provided for me and my family. My wife also is a alumnus of UAB. She has 3 degrees from UAB, including a master's in nursing. So we have given a lot of our time and energy and efforts to UAB. And it's been great. One of the things that UAB did for me is when I was finishing my master's degree, I was placed at the Amelia Center as an intern to finish off my degree. I was very fortunate at that point in time in that one of the counselors who was there was leaving to take a job in Florida. I was about to graduate from my master's program. I was getting married in a few months, and I was very fortunate to be hired by the Amelia Center as a grief counselor as soon as I finished my internship. And to be honest with you, they couldn't get rid of me. I've never left. I worked my way up as a grief counselor, became the clinical supervisor, and did all the clinical programming. And 9 years ago, I became the executive director at the center. So it's been very good for us, and it's a place that I truly, truly love. Just to give you some background, just briefly, the Amelia Center is a department of Children's Hospital. We see basically 2 different groups of clients. We work first and foremost with bereaved parents, regardless of the age of the parent or the child. And we say that because we begin seeing bereaved parents as early as perinatal or infant loss. I have a full-time therapist. That's all she does is the perinatal losses. And then we go as old as you can humanly be and have a child to die. One of my favorite clients of all time was an 87-year-old lady whose adult son was murdered. So as a parent, you recognize that the breadth and scope of being a parent is just incredible. And anytime you lose a child, it's just a devastating loss. Also, we work with children, teenagers, and very young adults who've had a significant death. That can be the death of a friend, death of a parent, grandparent. If it's significant to them, then it's significant to us, and we want to see them as well. In that program, we also see the caregivers of children and teens. We believe it's extremely important that we have access to the caregiver while we're working with the child or the teenager, so that we can make sure that all the family is on the same page. We've learned over the years that if the parents or caregivers are not healthy and are not coping well, then children can't cope well either. But if the parent is coping well and is making healthy choices, then 90% of the time that child is going to be fantastically healthy and do okay. So those are the 2 programs we work with, or 2 populations. What makes us, I think, unique and special is that we don't charge for the services we provide. We're funded through Children's Hospital, we're funded through the United Way, and we're funded through private gifts and donations. So that's just a little bit of background about what I do. I'm married. I'm a father of two. Have been friends with Greg for a long time, and our boys have grown up together. So thankful for this opportunity. One thing I am not is I am not a bereaved parent. I make that clear with my clients, and I make it clear in presentations that I'm not trying to speak to you today as someone who knows how you feel or trying to tell you what worked for me. I'm a therapist. I've done this for 21 years, and my specialty right now is I work with bereaved parents, and I work some with spousal losses where there are young children in the home. I use this and the experience that I've gotten to try to be a teacher and try to help provide some information and some skills so that you can make the best choices and find ways of healthy healing and healthy grieving. But I'm not trying to tell you what to do. The things I'm going to talk about tonight, and there's so much that we could talk about, on occasion, some of it can sound a little contradictory. But what I want to point out, and what I tell clients all the time, is that normal is a really wide road. When you talk about grief and you talk about our coping skills as humans, there are a lot of things that we can do that may be very different from someone else. But just because it's different doesn't necessarily imply that it's unhealthy or it's not good. It can still be a normal reaction, and it still could be healthy, even if it looks very, very different from what someone else is doing. So as we talk and as we go through these things, please understand, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you that these are the only ways that you can heal and be better. What I'm trying to do is be a clearinghouse of information. I'm trying to help you understand that by talking to bereaved clients for 20 years, 21 years now, that I've retained a lot of information about their choices, the things that have worked, the things that haven't, and there are always exceptions to everything I'm going to tell you or talk about. But generally speaking, what I would like to talk to you about tonight are the things that seem to work the best for most people. But I'll say it many times tonight, this is your life. These are decisions you have to make for you and your family. But these are the things that we've seen that are hopefully helpful and help people get through some of these significant days and holidays. So that's a little bit about myself, about what I do. In order to talk about grief in the holidays, I think it's important that we spend just a few minutes talking about grief in general. In order to understand how these techniques or these things apply for holiday times or significant days, any of these times, it's important to have an understanding, at least cursory, of what grief is like and the perspective that I'm coming from when I talk to clients about how to heal. So we're not going to spend a lot of time, but I think it's important. So we'll just touch on a couple of these things. First and foremost, we're talking specifically tonight about bereavement, the death of someone that we care about. But there are a lot of things in the world that cause grief. Grief is our general reaction to change or loss. It can include death, but it can also include things like divorce or abandonment or not getting a promotion. In other words, there's a lot of things in the world that cause grief, but we're talking fairly specifically today about bereavement, about what happens when someone you love dies. It can be any family member or any friend, but just know that grief is our reaction to a change or a loss. So broad grief as we talk. One of the first lessons that I talk to my clients about is everyone comes in and they want to know, how do I heal? How do I get through this experience? And the painful part of this is, number one, there are no easy answers. But I think there are two common themes that everyone has to kind of think about and work on in order to be better. So my standard answer when someone says, how do I heal from grief, is time and work. Boy, those sound simple. But let me tell you, nothing about this or the grieving experience is simple. It's always subtle, and there's nuance, and there's a lot of of learning and growing through it. So when I talk about time and work, let me elaborate on what I mean. First of all, time. We all understand the concept of time, but when you're grieving, whether it's a few weeks, a few months, a few years, time is weird. Time plays tricks on us. I tell my clients when they first come to see me, especially very early clients, this will more likely than not be the longest and the shortest year of your life. So time, we can talk about kind of what we expect in terms of timelines, but let's just establish that it's a slow process. The second component is work. And everyone asks, well, what is work? So let me give you an example real quick. I live down in Helena, love where I live, but also work in downtown Birmingham. And as anyone who's driven on 65 or any of the interstates, getting home after work on any given day is a crapshoot. Let's just agree that it takes about an hour to get home. If I get off work one afternoon and I get in my truck and I crank it, but I never put my truck into drive, I just sit there for a solid hour. At the end of an hour, where am I? I'm still sitting at home, or sorry, sitting at the office. I'm in the parking lot. I haven't gotten home yet. If my wife calls me and asks me where I am, I can tell her, listen, I put in the necessary time to get home. But what I failed to do was I didn't put in the necessary work to get home. By the same token, there's nothing that I can do in my truck that gets me home in 5 minutes. So getting home requires two things. It requires time and it requires work. And both of those things have to take place at the same time. They're inclusive of each other. So when we talk about grief and time, I've already said it's a long-term process, but that is a little misleading because for two reasons. Number one, and I hate to say this, but you already know this is true. Grief never ends. There is never an end point to the grief we feel when someone we love dies. Now, grief does soften. Grief evolves, grief changes. So when I have very early and new clients, we certainly talk about the fact that there is an acute period of grief. For some people, it's a year. Some people, it's 18 months. Some people, it can be longer than that. But there's a period where we recognize that there's a lot of adjustment and changes, and we're panicky, and we're just trying to survive. Eventually, we heal, and that softens a little bit, and we understand that grief is going to be a part of our existence forever. I believe that our loved one's continued absence continues to hurt us. So we're not just healing from the one loss or the one event. We're healing constantly, because anytime something happens, anytime you have that moment where you say, oh gosh, I wish that they were here, it brings stuff up, and it reminds us of their absence. And I think that wounds us over and over and over. So as far as time is concerned, there's never an end point of grief. However, it doesn't always feel the way it feels now. Regardless of where you are in terms of your timeline or how long it's been, please understand that grief slowly but surely changes and softens and evolves. In my office, I keep a clock, an old-fashioned clock with a minute hand and an hour hand. I've read recently that over half the kids in our country can't tell you what time it is based on that clock, but I like my clock. If I were to ask you, if you look at the hour hand of a clock or hour hand of a watch, does that hour hand move? Well, the answer is complicated. Yet we know in our brains the hand has to move, but you can't prove that it moves by just looking at it, by observation. The only way we know the hour hand on a clock has moved is if we wait an hour, we go back and look, and we see that it's in a different place. Sometimes grief is similar to that hour hand. We can't prove that we're moving or that we're healing or it's changing. But if we look back on sections of time, whether we look back 6 months, 12 months, a year or two, we can see that we're not in the same place. So time is a real elusive concept when it comes to grief. So time is a component. Second component, though, is work. And that's really what we're talking about tonight, is the work that has to take place to get better. So the question becomes, what kind of work do we need to heal from grief? And boy, this is even harder, because everybody's work is a little bit different, but there are some commonalities. So what is in common is, I think everyone, in order to heal from a grief, number one, needs a place to talk and express themselves. It doesn't mean they have to have therapy, but it means they have to have some place that they can talk to, that they can explore these ideas, maybe learn from. But talking and being able to express yourself is important. That's part of the work. Second part of the work is allowing yourself to be emotional. As a therapist, I have no strategies on how to make grief hurt less. As a matter of fact, I'm a believer that grief is a through experience. It's not an around experience. So in order to get better, part of it requires that you allow yourself to hurt, that you do some things that allows grief to be part of your existence. So I believe the work of grief heavily involves allowing yourself to feel some of the pain of grief. When someone you love dies, it hurts. It's supposed to hurt. And there's nothing that can be done that lessens the hurt. So it's better to have that hurt in your past by experiencing it than it is to always try to push it farther and farther into the future so you don't have to deal with it. So that's the second kind of work aspect, is that allowing ourselves to feel some of the pain, some of the emotion of this. Another part of the work is how we handle the task and the things we have to accomplish because our world has changed. And right into that is how we handle significant days, whether that's a holiday, whether it's a birthday, whether it's an anniversary, whatever the significant day is. How we learn to handle it and master that day is part of the grief work we have, because holidays are an incredibly important part of our lives. It's part of our culture. We need holiday. We need ritual. So I use an example with my clients a lot, and I hope you know what Arbor Day is. I don't know of anybody that celebrates Arbor Day, but it's kind of a safe thing to talk about. Let's suppose for a second that your loved one's favorite holiday was Arbor Day. And every Arbor Day, the sun comes up, you wake up early, you go buy a tree, you dig a hole, you plant your tree. That's how you celebrate Arbor Day. Well, let's suppose this is the first or even the second holiday time coming up, and you just don't know that you can emotionally handle Arbor Day this year. So you have enough Valium or Klonopin or whatever your numbing medication of choice is. Arbor Day rolls around, you numb yourself up, you don't deal with it at all. You wake up the next morning and you think to yourself, whew, I handled Arbor Day. Well, I would suggest as a therapist that you really haven't. You've only postponed the emotions, the demons, the things you have to work through with that day in order to be healthy. I would argue that until you wake up and you plant a tree in honor of that person who died, I don't know that you've handled or mastered Arbor Day. So part of this idea of working through our holidays in order to be better is that we have to do some things that potentially could be painful or cause us some discomfort. Part of this is we have to work through it. Now, frequently we spend time outside. One of our favorite places is by the water, by the rivers. At my desk in my office, I keep a river stone. You know what a river stone is? One of those real smooth, round rocks that you find in a fast-moving stream. What I like about a river stone is it feels soft and it's supple in your hand. It's something you want to hold on to. But do you ever wonder, what does a rock like that look like before it falls into a river or a stream? And if you know rocks, if you've ever seen one, a rock is rough and it's sharp, and there's nothing pleasant about holding just an average rock in your hand. It's not the same as holding that smooth stone. So I equate this sometimes to our grief, and sometimes to our memories, and sometimes to the things we're trying to heal through. You know, you think about these memories that you have of these loved ones. You think about the tradition of a holiday that you're trying to think of how you're going to get through it. Well, just like that rock laying in the river, the water over time works that rock, and it's what smooths the edges. Same with grief and our memories and our tradition. It's the thinking of those people. It's remembering them. It's telling stories. It's including them into our lives. It's including them into our new tradition that slowly knocks those edges off. Everyone envisions holidays being pleasant and being fun and being something that you don't dread anymore. But no one really thinks about what it takes to get to that place. Now, caveat, if this is your first one and the best you can do is minimal or almost nothing, that's fine. You do what you have to do. But if your goal is to be 5, 10 years down the road, and holidays mean something again, and they're special, and they're not something that gives you anxiety or worry, how do you get to that place? Well, the answer is the same as that rock in that river. You have to let the time and the work knock those edges off. And you knock the edges off in this sense by doing as many things as you can that are courageous, that are sometimes painful, that are as close to what traditionally you've always done. That's what knocks the edge off. That's what eventually makes those memories supple and something that you want to hold on to and share. It's what makes holidays meaningful again and special. It's the doing, not just the waiting. You know, that rock can sit by the edge of that river for 100 years, but if it never gets in the water, nothing changes about it. Well, just like with holiday tradition, we can envision that in 10 or 12 years, things are easy and great again. But if we don't do the work leading up to those 5, 7, 10 years, we've really not accomplished what we're trying to accomplish. It doesn't just magically happen because a number of years have passed. That's the thing about grieving. It is a proactive, active experience. There's nothing about this that's passive. We can be passive in our grief, but it doesn't mean that we're working to make it better. It just means that we're biding some time. Times when that's okay. But generally speaking, the more work you do, the more confrontational you are with your grief, the better you end up being. That works for most people. So let's talk specifically about holidays. How do you work a holiday so that you get better? Well, the answer is both simple and complicated. You have to find what works for you and your family. I want to talk about what works for a lot of the families I work with. But a lot of this stuff is some things that you have to figure out as well. And I hope in a few minutes when we get to some questions and we talk more specifically about what you want to know, that we can touch on some of these points. But let me give you some overview. The first thing I always encourage to start with, be courageous. Too often, my families, they come back to me after a holiday or after a significant day, and they have regrets. They have regrets about what they did or what they didn't do. 90% of the regrets people have is they wish they had been bolder in their decisions. The regrets they have are usually, gosh, I wish we had done more. I wish we had decorated more. I wish we had gone with friends when you had the chance. I wish we had family over. The regrets most people express is that they weren't bold enough. Very rarely do clients come back and say, you know, I did too much. I pushed myself too hard. That can be part of the story. That's usually not where the regret comes. The regret is that I wish I had done more. So if you're going to make decisions, and certainly if you're going to make mistakes, I encourage you to be as bold in your planning and be as bold in your rituals as you possibly can. You know, even if it hurts, that's okay. We can't make decisions based on what hurts or what doesn't, because healing requires hurting, and it's scary and it's painful and it's not something that you want to do. But you also don't want to grieve all your life either. You don't want to be stuck where you can't enjoy your family or enjoy your friends or enjoy the holiday. So the first piece of advice in all your decisions, be courageous, be bold wherever you can. Regret not doing enough instead of regretting what you did. My clients get tired of hearing me say it. Make a plan. You know, if your plan is that you're going to wake up on any significant day and wonder what you're going to do, or hope you feel like doing something, I would jokingly tell you that's a really bad plan. Most people wake up, especially when they're emotional, especially when they're hurting already, and without obligation or without something already planned for them. It's way too easy just to stay in that bed or stay on the couch or not make the phone call, not do something. So with any holiday, any significant day, make a plan. The plan should always include people, someone that you care about, someone that cares about you, and as many people as you can handle. Sometimes big crowds are really hard, but you can have a few people. And I always tell my clients, go somewhere and do something. Staying on your couch is rarely a good idea. Most of us, just human nature, when we're sad, we're kind of in that place of depression or anxiety, or we're dreading something. If we spend the day by ourselves, we have a tendency of spiraling. The emotions start kicking in. We hit that downward spiral, and it happens really fast. If you have friends, if you have an obligation, if you have things that make you get up and get moving, the vast majority of the time, people feel better. They appreciate that decision. They think it kind of gets them up and out of the house. But those are really important points. Make a plan, have people, do something, go somewhere. And in doing those things, forgive yourself if you need a moment. Forgive yourself if it becomes overwhelming. Understand that we're not robots, we're humans, and we have a lot of emotion. And just because we're being courageous and we're being bold and we're doing the best we can, doesn't mean that there aren't times where it becomes overwhelming. The mistakes that I think a lot of people make with holidays is they think they need to cut too many things out, cut out obligations, cut out movement, cut out people. And when you do that, you become lonely, you become by yourself and isolated. And with grieving, that's really not good. That's what we kind of want, but it doesn't mean that it's healthy. And we don't make decisions based on what we want. We make decisions based on what's in our best interest and what's in our family's best interest. The other mistake I see a lot of my clients make, it relates to the traditions and the rituals and the things that we do around the holiday time. I think the mentality or the thought sometimes is that, you're approaching this holiday, maybe it's the first, maybe it's, it is just too rough. And people think, well, if I cut out some of the tradition, if I cut out some of the things that I normally do, it also cut out some of those triggers or some of those pains that could be with the holiday. And while there is a little bit of truth to that, yeah, we can certainly minimize some of our triggers. I think the thing that people don't realize or pay attention to is that our traditions are here for a reason. We do rituals for a reason. I don't know about you guys, but I don't know half the reason why we do a lot of the traditional things that we do. I just know that we do them. We do them because we've always done them. And to certain levels, they give us comfort, and they give us something to look forward to, and it grounds us to the past. It grounds us to tradition and the people that we care about who were here before us. But if you start cutting too many of those things out of your life, you are not minimizing your grief. Matter of fact, what you're doing is you're increasing it, because you're grieving the person that you love, and then you're grieving the tradition, and you're grieving the expectation, and you're grieving some of the things that has given you a lot of comfort and a lot of joy in the past. So even if it's painful, try to keep as much of your tradition as you possibly can. If you can't, you can't. You do the best you can. But if it's possible, keep some of your tradition. Now, when you keep tradition and someone's missing, you have to change some of those things. So some of the traditions that are old and we just do them because, great, keep them. If there are traditions that are very specific to the person you love that's died, you may have to make some adjustments, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to cut it out completely. If, as a father, as a parent, I know that our Christmas tree has a lot of ornaments on it that our kids have made that are significant. It doesn't mean you have to find the box that have all your kids' ornaments in it. It does mean you need ornaments. I've had clients on all ends of the spectrum. It's funny, I've had conversations this week. One of my moms, every single thing on her tree was made by her child. I had another mom, nothing on her tree is not brand spanking new because she couldn't put out anything that reminded her of her child that died. Both of those are healthy. Both of those are okay. The fact is, they still put up a tree and they did the best they could. That's my encouragement. Do the best you can. I've had many clients who will take stockings and have them embroidered with either a notation or a halo or wings. Had a client just this week bring a stocking in for her son, and her thoughts of him is he is in the heavens. So the stocking she bought was beautiful. It was dark blue and it had small stars embroidered on it and a moon. And she had a special ornament that matched it that she's going to put on the tree just for him. The point is, these traditions are important. The ritual is important. Do the best you can at preserving them. And this is where it gets a little bit hard, because if I were having this conversation in person, I can look you in the eye and let you know where I'm coming from with this statement. But talking at a phone is a little bit harder. But I hope you understand the message and the intent of what I'm about to say. I understand that if you're listening to this today, someone you love is gone, and that is painful. But I also understand that there are still people in your life. You may have other children, their family members, friends. We all still have people that care about us and that we care about. And if you don't, then finding someone to help is a great tradition that you can start this holiday season. But you have people that love you and that are watching and are still a part of your existence. As you make these decisions about the holidays, as you think about what it is you want to cut out or change or alter, you're balancing two things. You're balancing grief and you're balancing the people who are still here. And what I would tell you in the gentlest way I know, the person who died can no longer be hurt by decisions you're making about holidays. But the people who are still here can. And sometimes we have to do the things for the people who are still alive and present in our life, even if it hurts. The most blatant example of this I have took place almost 15 years ago. I had a client. She was a single mom. She had a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, both little boys. And unfortunately, the 5-year-old died. Happened in September. By the time Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's kind of rolled around, she couldn't do it. She couldn't celebrate Christmas at all, even though she had an 8-year-old who was watching. At the last moment on Christmas Eve, she went to the Walmart. She bought a small Christmas tree that was battery powered. And with her 8-year-old in tow, she went to the cemetery and decorated that 5-year-old's grave with a Christmas tree. She did nothing for the 8-year-old. They were not my clients at that point in time, but I can assure you they were shortly thereafter, because the 8-year-old couldn't understand why he wasn't important enough for Christmas. It's the most stark case I have or have ever had of someone who could not do a holiday and actually damage someone she loved because of the pain she was afraid of feeling. Now, that's an extreme example, but it goes to highlight that we can still hurt or disappoint people who still love us and still need us. So when I talk about these decisions to be courageous, that's what I mean. Sometimes we have to do things that are courageous and possibly very, very painful because people we love still need the tradition. They still need to know that holidays are important. So as you think about your plan, make a plan that includes people. Make a plan that has you going or doing something. And make a plan that allows you to preserve as much tradition as you possibly can. Whether that's decoration, whether it's stockings, whether it's any of these kind of things that we do to kind of highlight the reason we have a holiday, the reason we have significant days. I hope that comes across the way I'm wanting it too, because this is an important part, because I don't want people that love you or in your care or around you to be unnecessarily hurt because you're afraid. And grief is very much like fear. Now, I've had a lot of clients who try to do something dramatically different around the holidays. I've had clients who took a cruise at Christmas for 10 solid years. It worked for them until year 11. And the first time they unpacked the boxes and pulled out decorations for Christmas, they came back and told me, it was hard. It was as hard as it would have been the first year or two, because grief doesn't go anywhere. Grief doesn't magically disappear. Grief has to be worked through. Grief is a through experience. It's not an around experience. And trying to take trips or move or go away for a while is an attempt to get around grief. It's not an attempt to go through it. So if you do something dramatically or radically different, that's certainly fine. I hope it works well for you. But just understand that sometimes those radical differences may not have the results that you hope for. Maybe they will for you. I certainly hope so. But you do the best you can. And in the first year or two, the goal is survival. Can you survive this experience? We'll work on correcting mistakes and things as we heal. But you got to survive it. So if something bold or something very different is in your plans, that's okay too. Just know that the work of working the holiday hasn't really taken place in that sense, unless you can incorporate some things in both. So have a plan, do the best you can. The last couple of things, we talk about how these memorial things can take place and how we add some meaning or significance to our holiday. If we want to incorporate the person we love into our holiday, then sometimes we have to change a little bit of our tradition or be conscientious in how we want them to be a part. Certainly memorial candles and those kind of things, photographs can be a huge part. I've already mentioned stockings. Ornaments can be a huge part as well. The Elliots, George and Jerry Elliott, who were Amelia's parents, who the center is named after. Amelia died in 1995 in a car-train collision in the summer. She was killed in June. Her mom, Jerry, had already purchased an ornament for her that year. That's something that she did every year. And Amelia was known for two things. She loved sunflowers, and she was a ballerina. She loved to dance. Jerry ended up had bought her a small ballerina Christmas tree ornament. So as Christmas rolled around, the question was, what do we do with this ornament that I've had in a box? And they decided they would put it up on the tree, even though it was painful. They put it around the bag so they wouldn't have to see it all the time, but they put it there. And as family came over for that first Christmas, one of the things that Jerry actually took some comfort in was pointing out Amelia's ballerina ornament. The next year, every family member gave Jerry and George either a ballerina ornament or a sunflower ornament. And Amelia's section of the tree grew substantially. Today, if you go visit the Elliots, they have two trees. They have their normal family Christmas tree with kids and grandkids and all the stuff on it. And then they have Amelia's tree, which is decorated in nothing but ballerinas and sunflowers. I'm not saying you have to have two trees. I'm saying that when you make some intentional remembrances or intentionally remember the people we love, it can be a new tradition that provides a lot of comfort, and it can work for a lot of people. So those are my tips on how you do things. If you're one of the people who you truly do not have people in your life that you care about or care about you right now, I encourage you to reach out and find someone that you can help. There are always people that are there that need us and can benefit from our time and our efforts and our experiences. So find someone that you can help. One of the things a lot of clients talk about is they still feel the need to buy for that person that they love that's died. And I say, go do it. There are enough angel trees, enough needy people in our society right now that if you want to go purchase or shop for the person that you love, go do it. Buy that item and then find someone that needs it more. And it gives you the chance to talk about your loved one. It gives you a chance to help someone else. Helping others can be a really important part of our holiday new tradition to make us feel some of that purpose and meaningfulness and still fulfill the needs that we have. So that is it. Now, I would certainly love to answer any questions or anything that you want to know about.
Robert, thank you so much. And what you do cannot be easy on a day in, day out basis. If you do have questions, go ahead, toss them in the chat. I will pass them along to Robert and we'll get those answered. I'll kick things off. So you want to preserve traditions. Is there ever the right time or healthy time to create those new ones, or how do you know when it's the right time?
That's a good question. Sometimes I will tongue-in-cheek talk to my clients, and they'll say, I'll do it when I feel like it. If you have ever been overwhelmed by grief, you will quickly learn that you don't ever feel like it. I'm a big fan of fake it till you make it. So I don't think there's ever a time where we have to wait to start new tradition or wait to integrate that person into our current tradition. I think you do it as soon as you're capable of doing it. And I think you make a good effort, even if it's the first holiday season. Do your best. If it doesn't work, do something else next time. But once again, try to do something. Do something to try to integrate it and try to change it as soon as you can. Don't wait till you feel like it to start doing things, because sometimes you don't ever feel like it, but you do it anyway.
If people are wanting to ask questions and you're not comfortable, go ahead and send them to me in a private chat. Here's a question that I have. How do you find yourself again after the death of a child?
Ooh, that's hard. It's hard because we define ourselves sometimes through our kids. You know, we're parents, we're spouses, we're siblings, we're friends. We have these multiple components to ourselves. But being a parent is a huge one, and we get a lot of our meaning from it. I think the death of a child, or really any significant death we have, it redefines us as people. We are forever changed because of their absence. So there's not an easy answer with how you find meaningfulness or how you find yourself after a significant death, because you are truly creating and reinventing yourself in light of that absence. The one thing I would talk about, though, is that I think sometimes grief, I'm a visual person. So can you imagine a pie chart that represents all the people in our lives? And we have a slice, and our kids have a slice, and our friends and our job and everything about us has a slice. I would argue that in the beginning, grief has too big of a slice. Grief is intrusive. Grief is it runs roughshod over your life. So this pie chart, it's maybe it's half grief and everybody else is in there. The only way grief can become that big of a piece is if everything else in your life gets squished. We lose some of those things. I think sometimes we spend so much time trying to figure out how to shrink the grief piece that we don't realize that we make it smaller by making the other pieces in our life bigger. I think healthy healing, especially in the long term, is that reinvestment in life, is that reinvestment in the friends and the relationships and the family that we still have. It's finding new sources of meaningfulness. It's allowing ourselves to put energy and effort and time into the people and the things that are still here and are still important to us. That shrinks that other piece, that grief component. The people we love and that we're grieving for always deserve a piece of that pie. I would never argue anything different. But it doesn't mean that it has to be the biggest piece, because in our life we have a lot of things going on, a lot of other people and a lot of other experiences. I think recommitment and reinvestment in those things helps us put grief into a size that's more appropriate for us to live happy and healthy lives.
This person's their son's father passed away unexpectedly 2 months ago. He hasn't cried or shown sadness since the day that they told him the news. Is this normal?
It is, depending on age of the child. One of the things I always point out is that children, their sole responsibility is to be okay. And when they've had a significant death and they recognize that caregivers may not be okay, kids don't do a lot of things that would jeopardize the well-being of their caregiver. So if they even think for a moment that their caregiver is upset, or if they express themselves, it will make their caregiver upset. Those are the things that in their mind that puts them in danger in some degree. If you have a parent who's no longer cooking dinner or keeping house, or they're not going to work, or there's a schedule or routine, that's scary for a kid. So if they can not make that parent upset, and maybe there's some stability, then that's usually what they do. They become kind of martyrs pretty quickly. Now, I will say, 95% of the time, children are extremely healthy when it comes to grief. They adapt well, they handle things well, but they also are a little bit slower in when they want to let things out. They have to make sure they're okay before they can really start exploring that. I also advise parents, just because your kid's not talking to you doesn't mean they're not talking. Kids today are very peer-driven. They have a lot of resources to talk to people that we may not be aware of, whether it's through the phone, through chat, through games, PlayStation or whatnot. Kids can talk and they're very peer-driven. So sometimes they'll express themselves to friends and really not share a lot of stuff with family. So not a lot of emotion is not uncommon with kids or young teens.
How do you deal with the worry of something happening to your other children? One passes away, one dies. How do you deal with that worry?
It's paranoia. It's anxiety. And paranoia is not a bad word. It's just the best, most inclusive way to describe it. Grief is an anxiety. Grief is a stress. Sometimes we think about it or try to think about it like it's depression. And there are some things that mimic, especially the sadness and the lack of motivation and those kind of things. But if you really think about grief, it's more of an anxiety response, the way it affects our physical bodies, the way it affects the way we see society and people, the way our sense of danger is increased. So when we have parents who have a child that dies and then there are other children, that sense of paranoia and anxiety really goes through the roof. I think grieving people, part of the process of healing is understanding that before your child died, bad things like this happened to other people. And now you're coming to terms with your other people. And if you're other people and something bad has happened, then something bad can happen again. I don't necessarily believe that's true because I don't think the world is any safer or more dangerous than it was beforehand. I think your perception of it is different. So you have to have good, healthy behaviors, such as you have to exercise, you have to have good nutrition, you have to minimize your self-medication, you need possible therapy, someone to talk to. Those are the things that we can do in a healthy way that helps relieve some of our anxiety, and we can believe that the world is safe again. Part of what it takes is you have to wake up and everything be okay that day for a certain number of days to believe that it's true again. But it's a very common reaction. It's a very common phenomenon that we become paranoid and overly concerned about the safety of the other people that we love, knowing that they're out and about in a dangerous world.
So how do you deal with the guilt that you sometimes feel when you have a feel-good day and you realize you're laughing about something, so you just kind of feel guilty about it?
Sure. Happens a lot. And I think one of the reasons that happens is when we have a very unexpected loss or a traumatic loss or some of these horrific things. I think grief is overwhelming. I think grief it kind of shocks us. I think a lot of people will tell themselves, now that I'm bereaved, I will never be happy again. I'll never laugh again. Bereaved people shouldn't do that. And we tell ourselves this story about how we should behave for the rest of our lives. We tell it in a moment of panic and insecurity and being overwhelmed with emotion. So what happens is we start to heal. We do find some joy because life is still good. There are still things to be joyous and happy about. And when that happens, when we have a moment of levity, a moment where grief isn't pressing us down into the floor, we remember what we told ourselves. We remember that scenario of, oh my God, I'm not supposed to ever do this again. And it just can't be true forever. There is things in our world that we can be happy about. So as we tell ourselves a new story that even though I love this person, even though I'm devastated that they're gone, I am still allowed to heal. I'm still allowed to be a happy person. I'm still allowed to have events and joy in my life. If we tell a better story, a more realistic story, it helps remove some of that guilt or regret that we have when we start to feel better. We crave it, we want it. And I ask clients all the time, why are you here? You want to be better. So don't be surprised when eventually you
you become a little bit better.
Final question before we let you go. This person lost their grandmother on December 22nd when they were a child. Their family never really worked through their grief. So as an adult, they find that they're always especially sad as Christmas grows closer. Can they do the grieving now as an adult that wasn't done years ago?
Absolutely. Grief never ends. It never stops or goes away. It only evolves and softens. One of the things that's hard to figure out is that, we are very aware sometimes of seasonal things. So if you have a loss or a traumatic event that happens at a certain time, it happened at a certain time of the year, our bodies remember that. We may not always consciously remember some of these things, but our bodies always do. I would just point out, at this time of year, it's easy to think about. We know what a Christmas tree smells like. We know what the outside looks like, the sun at a little bit different of an angle as opposed to the summertime. Outside right now, you can smell damp, decaying leaves. You can smell just a little bit of smoke in the air, especially when it's cold, people building fires. Every season has smells and sights and sounds that we remember in our bodies. Summertime, you got the high sun and the heat, fresh cut grass. In the springtime, you have flowers, you have pollen. We remember these things. So when a tragic event takes place, our bodies are to our core will remember what it was like when that happened. And when we approach that season again, even if it's subtle or even if it's unconscious, we'll remember the sights and the smells, and we remember and reflect back on those events and certainly on those people that we care about. And if you talk about grandmother and what grandmothers mean to us, especially at holiday time, it's incredible. And have that loss and have that person be to some degree forgotten or never mentioned or never kind of wrapped into your new tradition. Listen, that's a terrible event that's taken place. You're allowed to grieve it. So certainly you can grieve her now. I would certainly talk about to my kids, hey, let me tell you about my grandmother. Let me tell you about the things we did when I was your age. Let me hang them in an ornament that remembers her. But yeah, you can certainly do some of that grief work and incorporate her into your new tradition.
Robert, thank you so much for sharing insight on how to cope with a loss through the holidays and taking time out of your evening to spend with us.
I was glad to do it. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you again. And just a heads up to all of tonight's guests, a recording of Robert's presentation will be available online starting tomorrow. Meanwhile, be sure to join us for other upcoming webinars. Next Thursday, December 16th, we will get interactive with Ryan Abrams from Paper Doll Bar for Holiday Mixology 101. Join us as we create cocktails that are sure to impress your families and friends. Then on Thursday, January 6th, Dr. Courtney Peterson will join us for intermittent fasting. Should I really eat breakfast? Dr. Peterson will explore this topic and let us know if it really helps us to lose weight and improve health. And on Thursday, January 27th, we'll welcome alumna Carol Dunavant for your last phase of planning. Preparing for the end of life is never easy. Find out what you need to know to make sure you and your family is ready. Find out more about these events or register at alumni.uab.edu/events. Whether you're in your office or traveling, download our UAB Green and Told podcast. Every other week, we sit down with members of the UAB community to share their stories. All of our episodes can be found on Spotify and the Apple Podcast app, or visit alumni.uab.edu/green and told. And stay on top of everything alumni on social media. Just search UAB Alumni on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also look us up on LinkedIn by searching UAB Alumni Career Community. If you need to contact us, it's easy. Email alumni@uab.edu or visit the website alumni.uab.edu. Once again, thank you so much for joining us for tonight's discussion with Robert Smith. Have a great evening, and as always, go Blazers.